Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we discuss all things cannabis, whether that's U.S. MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. I'm here joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the High Rise.
Emily, it is so good to be back. It has been a number of weeks. I was out in Europe for a couple of weeks. I had an opportunity to have a special episode with the Oscar guys, kind of hear some of their outlook. Totally different world out there. As everyone knows in the High Rise, we're really US MSOs, Canadian LPs. So Europe is a complete unknown. So that was pretty interesting to kind of get some of their perspective. It sounds like a totally different market, and who knows what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I was sorry I couldn't participate due to technical difficulties, but it sounded like an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it was good. And certainly, you were missed. But happy to be back with our regular scheduled programming. So today, traveling again, it seems like there's a lot of travel happening, whether, on your end, on my end. I think everything's opened up quite a bit. Events are happening. And I'm down here in Santa Rosa from Seattle for the Hall of Flowers.
I am so excited to hear about what you're seeing up there because the Hall of Flowers is one of my favorite things that happens in the industry. And it started in Santa Rosa a few years ago. It was started by some veteran trade organization event planners who had done this in the music industry, I think music and entertainment. And so they're very seasoned. They put that show together. And I remember I was like, this is the day that the industry changes because it was so well put together. It was such a cool showcase of brands and retailers. And it's everything that I love about this industry is being able to see the innovation in that area. So I can't be there because I was just traveling abroad and I'm trying to be COVID cautious and not while I quarantine a little bit at home until I feel comfortable going out again. But yeah, I'm very curious to hear what it's like up there.
Yeah, we've exhibited at the Hall of Flowers with Headset since the beginning, but actually it's my first time going. And yeah, it's crazy to think that, but just with so many events sometimes, and we've got a good sized team that we're pretty well covered, but it's a good opportunity to get back out there to meet people. I think everyone's really excited to be at an in-person event again, and you can really feel, that vibe. So I wanted to make sure I could come, see it myself. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Hall of Flowers started really to highlight the best of the emerging cannabis brands from across, the state of California. And we've talked at length about, California strategies, and you hear about the single state operators or super state operators, as I've heard, people reference it, really competing in California and winning in California and then scaling from there. And so, that's definitely reflected here just in the massive amount of brands that are on display. And they also feature what they call a handpicked selection of innovative technologies to be able to exhibit as well. So that's how Headset gets to be there, even though we're not a brand producing product, we're not a CPG type brand, but we are able to exhibit and connect with a lot of our customers, both on the brand side and the retailer side, because on the retailer dispensary side, a lot of buyers are coming through, kind of looking at, what should they add to their assortment, their inventory carry, and so on. So really, really excited to be here. And it's awesome. It is so cool to just see all the exhibitors, all the brands that are there. We look at these numbers all the time. They're a name and they're a number, in Headset. And it's really cool to see the brand and meet the people behind the brands and really get some of that qualitative sense of what are they trying to accomplish? How do they see the world? What is their strategy? I talked to one of the top brands, maybe the top brand in California, and just talking to them about how they see the world, and they're number one, but they're very mindful of being number one. And we've seen number one brands in California that have held that position for some time that have lost the position, and they're very mindful about keeping that position and using data to do that. And just really, really cool to see. So it's a quite a big show. It kicked off this morning. We're recording this Wednesday, September 22nd. Opened at 11. Didn't get too much time to really wander around and see what's on display quite yet. I'm looking forward to doing that this afternoon. But got to spend a fair amount of time in our booth and just people coming through, chatting. It's nice. Kind of feels like back to normal, even though everyone's masked up. You had to be vaccinated to come in. They checked your vaccine cards before you're allowed to go in. So that does help with some of that, concern because we're still in the midst of this pandemic and the Delta variant and all the rest. But I think the sentiment is just really positive. Everyone is excited. And I don't know if that's a byproduct of, everyone kind of getting out of the house and seeing people that maybe they've only been Zooming with, meeting people for the first time in person or meeting old friends, from way back, or a combination of that with just like what's ahead for the industry in California.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's so great about this industry is how tangible it is. What we're doing is not just in the ether, it's actual products, it's people, it's retail experiences, consumer experiences. And I feel like the Hall of Flowers being a showcase of brands and retail experiences and innovative technologies is such a great and interactive thing. And I know they're doing another one I'm definitely going to the one in Palm Springs. I was supposed to go right before in COVID 2020 when it shut down in that, I think it was like going to be April or something. So they have that in December. I'm definitely going to go check it out because I think California being really, it's such a massive market. It's such a complicated market. The brands here are really leading the way, right? And so what's amazing about California too is it's such a massive market. The Northern California market has different brands and products than the Southern California market, or they have the same, but it's interesting to see who leads in kind of which different markets. And so I feel like for me, being based in San Francisco, Santa Rosa is just north of here. It's great to have had it there. It's right in wine country, but it'll be very exciting to see what is down at the Southern California show later this year. But I always say, like, if people are on the East Coast, if they want to see the future of where this industry is going as their markets turn on, coming to the Hall of Flowers or a show like this is a great way to get a glimpse into the future. Or at least that's how I feel when I go there. I'm like, oh, we're really on the path of being a consumer product company, consumer product industry, really. And there, for anyone who's going to be in Las Vegas, the MJ Unpacked show is also taking that approach. And I think Hall of Flowers is doing something there as well. But it's just exciting to see these things. And I think Sai and I were talking, you and I were talking before the show about the backdrop of the public markets having been pretty difficult in spite of the great Q2 earnings calls that we heard. And we know the top folks in the industry really beat or met their projections. And so it's cool to see these other things that are very positive and to hear that from you that the sentiment of people getting together is very high because it means we continue to build in spite of that kind of backdrop of the public market action.
Totally, totally. It's exactly right. And I think that's what a lot of people understand is like the fundamentals are good, the businesses are good, the businesses are growing, but that's not necessarily reflected in, the stock market, capital market, which for whatever reason, and I know we'll get into, federal legalization and change at the federal level in some sense. And some of it is a bit of that, but it is, it's a good reminder to see it. And maybe because we haven't had an event of this scale in our space for a year and a half, it's a good kind of refresher that this is pretty significant. And you got a great point about, the people in the East Coast markets, Midwest markets, emerging markets coming here and looking at the brands. And I think that that is happening. I saw a couple groups, people we've had on this very podcast this morning in line to check in. And, they're out here, I'm sure, looking at what brands can they bring, when we think about the Green Thumb deal with Can, and Can was a California beverage company, right? And GTI brought that brand into their locations in other markets, which is a great strategy for a brand because scaling in other markets, getting the licenses, building the facilities is tough. And this industry is fragmented and that's challenging to do. It's very costly and so on. So I think there's probably a lot of that happening here. And it's the best place to do it. Yeah, we look at some numbers to kind of give you a sense of like a limited license market. Maybe that's not the right term. Every market's a bit different. Like East Coast, Midwest, some of these, highly predominantly MSO markets, they don't have a lot of average SKUs. Like the average SKU count, the average products that a retailer might carry is pretty small. And so to kind of back that up with some numbers, on the extreme, Florida, average number of products that are sold in a store, distinct SKUs. You can imagine going to a grocery store, everything on the shelf is a SKU. Only 48 SKUs. It's crazy, right? It's like nothing, like a handful of strains, probably a couple edibles, maybe a vapor pen. It's not much, right? And you On the flip side of that, in extremes, Washington State has the most at 1,600 SKUs. So imagine walking into a store in Seattle and you're looking at over 1,000, going on 2,000 distinct products on the shelves, right? So it's tough for a consumer to navigate. Certainly, speaking from experience, being a Seattle resident, that has to do with with Washington not being vertically integrated and the way the licensing rolled out. So there's a lot of brands and products that have developed, maybe too many, and I'm sure that will consolidate over time. But that is the number, 1,600. And then California sits at about 700. So it's number two on the number of SKUs. So there are a lot of products on the store shelves, which I think, it shows that there's a lot of opportunity. I think that long term there won't be 700 SKUs on a retailer shelf. Maybe, that could be the case with more, industry maturity. I mean, I don't know what like an average, if you went to like Total Wine or Beverage
Mhm.
Bevmo or something, they probably have something like that. But we'll see. But it's a lot of products, and that's all reflected here at Hall of Flowers, and you can see them all and see how they're all, positioning themselves. So that's exciting. And then some more data, just looking at August sales, when I look at the top 10 brands in the market, this is across all categories, just total dollars, generated for August. August in California did about $430 million in sales, which is a pretty good number. So 430 million in sales, and the top 10 brands did 112 total when you add them together. So what is that? That's
Like a quarter.
25% of the market. And I think when you look at the top 20 brands, it's about 40% of the market. Yet there are hundreds of brands, hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of brands here, right? And as I mentioned before, the top brands aren't always the top brands. They do cycle out. So the number one brand has been cycled out in the past, and there's a lot of fluidity to this top 20 list. And I think that's what everyone is here, kind of vying to be, and all sorts of new brands that I noticed today that I had not heard of or hadn't seen, that were pretty new to the market. So all in all, really really excited to be here. Really good event, and if you're in the industry, I'm sure you're aware of it. If you're not, you can look it up, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of great photos that kind of represent the scale of this thing. But yeah, it's certainly exciting.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's great to see, and I actually love that about brand building, is that it's hard to hold on to the pole position, you know? It's good to see that there's disruption, because I think the consumers benefit when companies compete and work really hard to give them the best products that they can. So, and I think it also creates access for more diversity in our consumer base, as we were talking about actually in some of the other markets, where we don't want it just to be about turning on markets and creating and increasing market share. We want it to be about depth. We want it to be about serving different segments of the population. So I think it's great. I can't wait to go in December. Hopefully things will
Yeah,
be okay.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if they're having, yeah, hopefully, if they can have it now, I'm sure they'll have it then. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Like, seeing that kind of movement in the top brands. I mean, it's not like, Coca-Cola sits on the top of the charts, forever, and there's not a lot of innovation. I think, yeah, seeing that movement is good. One thing that we've noticed at Headset, in the top 10, the house brand, which is what we use as kind of a catch-all brand for the brands that are retailers producing, so their own
Yeah.
internal brands that maybe they don't, or they certainly don't distribute to other retailers. We aggregate it as house brand, and you can imagine there are a lot of retailers that produce their own flour and sell their own flour under their name, and so it's a big representation of overall sales, and it's in the top 10, but it's dropped, three places this year. Just
Mm.
August versus July, it's dropped one place. So what that tells me is that
Mm.
the CPG brands, the dedicated brands that are not associated by name with the retailer, that some of these brands sometimes are coming from MSOs and so on, but or maybe owned by an MSO, but they distribute them to other retailers. So I
Hmm.
think it just shows like the power of brands, the power of CPG that they have if the vertically integrated house brand is dropping in the chart. So I think that's a good signal. And I guess I could go on and on about brands, but another thing we've looked at recently at Headset is loyalty, and
Hmm.
brand affinity, brand loyalty, and there's sometimes in the industry people will say blanket statements and everyone starts to just believe it, and they kind of parrot these statements like there's no brand affinity or there's no brands in cannabis. Like, And in some ways, I get why they say that, right? There's no Coca-Cola. Like it's hard to ask someone in California, name a top brand of cannabis, and then you go to Florida and ask the same question, you're not going to get the same answer, right?
Mm-mm.
And so I understand that, but we are seeing within markets more, brand affinity, brand loyalty
Mhm.
that's coming. And this is shown like we're looking like edibles. So like in brands in California here, like Stizzy makes an edible. They do vapor pens. Select, which is owned by Cureleaf, does edibles. Camino edibles from Kiva and Mindy's chef-led artisanal edibles. And we kind of looked at the four of them, right? And if you've ever seen them on the store shelves, they're positioned quite differently, right? They like Stizzy's brand, very colorful. They're these little bright cubes, really really pop all the way to like Mindy's artisanal glazed clementine orange, edibles. Certainly seems to, point to maybe a more sophisticated older audience, maybe more of a premium price point. You can just kind of see that, any brand,
Mhm.
you can look at a brand, a bottle of alcohol and kind of understand, how are they trying to fit? And we're seeing that happen. And we see different, affinity, different audiences gravitating towards these brands. Like for Stizzy, it over indexes, certainly male, or sorry, Stizzy, well, Select actually over indexes male. Stizzy over indexes the younger audience, like Gen Z. And I think you can kind of see that in the packaging and kind of their positioning and their
Mhm.
marketing. So you're seeing that. And these other brands like Mindy's Edibles over indexes on the older audience, like baby boomers are buying more of those types of, or that brand specifically. So we're seeing that, right? So it's not just all brands are created equal. You walk into a store and you say, give me an edible, and the bartender says, this is a good edible, right? People are starting to gravitate towards these brands. And then we see loyalty also. So we pulled some numbers, and this is on the vapor pen side. And we do this for any brand in the system, but this is from a recent presentation we gave at one of our data nights. And the average brand in the vapor pen category has a brand only loyalty, which means that if someone goes and buys that brand, they come back and they only buy that brand of about 13%. So
Oh.
13% of consumers that buy a brand will come back and only buy that brand, not buy anything else. About 33% will come in and say, I'll buy that brand and I'll buy another brand at the same time, but this
Mhm.
may be my anchor brand and I'm throwing in something else. And then about 55% are buying, something totally different and not coming back and buying that same brand. And a brand like Stizzy is starting to show that there is brand loyalty for a brand. So Stizzy numbers for VaporPen specifically, the brand only came in at 48%, almost 49% of people that buy Stizzy will come back and only buy Stizzy, right? And you compare that to 13%, which is kind of the index, the average there. I think that's starting to show that there is some loyalty, right? Brands are being built in this market. So it's exciting time. I think those generalities, they're not wrong when people say, there's no brands in cannabis or brands are coming. I get it. I totally get it. But I think we're starting to see it. And it's very much represented here at Hall of Flowers.
I mean, I have been talking about Gen Z for since before we started this podcast as a generation to watch, as the cannabis native generation, right? And I think it's just super smart. Steezy just went right after that, and I feel like it's showing because guess what? They're embedded in that generation's kind of set of things that they look for, and it stands for a certain quality, it stands for a certain profile of experience, and that's what gets people to come back. It is remarkable when I go around the state and meet with retailers. Obviously I was just talking about this today. We refer to our headset data all the time when we're verifying how we feel about brands and different categories too. But just also hearing anecdotes from the retail associates at the stores who say people come in and ask for that brand, and if it's out, then they're disappointed and they have to figure out what they're going to have next. And that's the starting point of really brand traction. And I think that that's really, but it does require continued innovation. I mean, they will have to keep up with that to maintain that position. But the good news is once you start having a brand, people will try things you bring to market. So then you've already gotten that entry point to launch new products and to keep your position with your cohort that you've gotten your hooks into. So They're really
Totally.
smart. Their data, I mean, the chart on Stizzy is like mind blowing in this market. It's really impressive.
It is, and they have expanded beyond vapor pen.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if that's where they started, but it's certainly the largest category for them into things like edibles and
Hmm.
leverage that brand loyalty. Because I'm sure someone buying a vapor pen from Steezy says, okay, well, I also want to get an edible. If they didn't have it, they'd pick up another brand, right? So it's
Hmm.
great that they can do that. And also for the vapor pen brand only, one aspect of their vapor pens is that it's proprietary hardware and proprietary cartridge. And that could play into that as well. Like vapor pen, the common 510 thread, which is kind of the generic battery. And there's so many brands that produce cartridges for that, and they went a different way. And there's other companies that organizations that do that as well. Organizations like PAX did it, way back with the eras. And but I think that does play into it a little bit. You're like bought into the ecosystem. You bought the Keurig coffee machine, like you're going to buy the Keurig coffee pods, right? You're not going to go and switch to an espresso after that fact. And I'm sure that's part of it. But they have done a good job. And you're right, the Gen Z, last I looked, it's been a while, but it was like, and Gen Z is like what, 21, 22, 23, probably some 24-year-olds. I'm not sure where the cutoff is, but you're right. They grew up in, they were born into a world where cannabis was legal in
Yeah.
California, medical cannabis, right? And so it's normalized for them. There's been, stores open, and they are well over 10% of sales, for just like
Yeah.
4 years of age. And every day someone's turning 21, so that segment continues to grow. So yeah,
Yeah.
pretty clever to target. There is, there's plenty of other consumers out there, but that's if you had a bet on a generation, like obviously you want to bet on the one that's going to be growing. Like every day, new consumers come in, where baby boomers, it's kind of the opposite, right? It's sad to say. Every day someone drops out, right?
Well, I mean, think about it this way. They turn 21, and from the outset, you're a part of their opportunity to spend their wallet. Instead of having to replace alcohol, you're just embedded into where they spend their money. And I think it's just like, yeah, just get right in there. Get in the mix, make it a part of the thing. And like then it's socialized. You don't have to kind of retroactively, like with my friends, I have to be like, does anybody want to try a low dose edible? I swear it
Right.
won't make you feel, it's like it's a whole different thing. So, and I'm not that old. I'm a geriatric millennial, as we know. And I'm wondering what happens with those geriatric Gen Zers. Like, where are they? But, yeah. So, and, it's always interesting when these generations start to get defined in their adult lives because the lines of where the ages are kind of blur
Hmm.
until they settle into something. I mean, I don't think we got defined, or I got defined as a geriatric millennial until this year. So, you know.
Yeah, that's a new one. That's the
But I do think it's a great time to be watching these things in California for all of its challenges, which I know we're about to talk about next. There are a lot of great. It's the proof. I feel like we often say this. It's the proving ground of great retail and great brand building. So for now, I think New York is going to be a formidable foe for those things when
oh
it
yeah,
gets online. But I can't wait to see what comes out of Brooklyn. But or the Lower East Side. Cool, the tastemakers.
totally.
But right now, California is the proving ground. So here we are.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
the California kind of the news. I mean, this was last month. Kind of I think the it started to come out that
Hmm.
wholesale pricing is bottoming out, and will certainly bottom out with the harvest here. And there was an article. I mean, there's a lot of articles, but just a quick Google search on SiliconValley.com was writing about it. And someone's quoted. I know it's amazing how this industry is just so mainstream at this point. Everyone's covering this stuff. But a quote from a grower in kind of the Emerald Triangle talking about average price per pound is around $700. And it says for a small farmer, it costs around $500 to grow a pound.
Hmm.
And so I think, it's going to be tough times for the wholesalers. But what's interesting in the headset data, so, the way headset sources data is through retailers and dispensaries. So we see, what's selling. We also see, inventory. We see, wholesale pricing that they are paying, and we can see margins. But when we look at just this year so far, there has been a lot of price pressure at retail. Like retail prices have held. I mean, it could be a couple things, right? But I think that the margins are there for the retailers, so maybe the brands are buying it cheap and keeping their pricing and passing that pricing on to the retailers in the same way, and they're capturing a margin, and retailers are keeping their margin. Could be also this will maybe impact downstream because this all impacts retail as the last link in the chain, right? From
Yeah.
production to retail. So what do you think about going to have an impact?
I do think so. So a couple of things are happening. We're already seeing it pricing way down on the wholesale of outdoor, especially, or sun-grown cannabis, which we love here in California. And by the way, there's still a premium paid for indoor. People love the way that the buds look. It's very beautiful, and it's that whole Pareto principle. We know flower is still the dominant category in the market, and we know that there are the enthusiasts, and they're the ones who tend to buy the most, right? The 20% that buy the 80% of
80%.
volume. Yeah. And they're very driven by the quality of indoor. They love the way it looks, the potency. Potency is still a big driver, all of those things. And then you have the sun-grown cannabis, which actually can be testing in at very high levels. We've seen sun-grown cannabis test in at about 28% THC. I mean, that's a
Wow.
pretty potent strain for outdoors. It may not look as beautiful, but I think I love the idea of outdoor or greenhouse-grown cannabis because for me, it's also about sustainability.
Sure.
And I think there's a certain talent to growing in nature. So there's that, which I think is interesting. But I digress. I'm also not the 20% that's buying 80% of the volume of the market. I'm like, yeah, I have a bud. I'll make this work for a while. But, I think that where I'm going with this is where we're seeing the price pressure is on the outdoor flower. And I think it actually dovetails to what we were talking about, branded products. I think if you have brand recognition around your flower, there may be some moat you can have around protecting the value or pricing of your product. But on a wholesale level, I'm hearing that there's plant matter being sold into the market at, I hate to say this, like $400 a pound
Wow.
already. Now, we've already seen this game play out in Colorado, and we saw it in Oregon, and I believe Oregon may have bottom ticked it around 300 a pound back in the day when there was the supply to demand flip upside down. And we know these things happen. What happened last year was actually quite the opposite. People were having a hard time sourcing flower, especially branded product companies or raw material, as we may call it. But this is where you have to think about how you add value across your supply chain to protect yourself against these different fluctuations in supply demand. And if you even have like an infused pre-roll, like the specialty pre-rolls, you already have some pricing control around how you can see this sold through to the end consumer or what it's being sold through, to your point, from being a product maker into the retailers. And I think that that's something that we can watch to see how this is going to play out. Because if it is just bulk flower, I think you're going to see really, really low numbers. And I mean, not to be a downer, but there is talk of this being kind of like a potential extinction event where we see some of these pure cultivators of the outdoor cannabis maybe flipping out of our legal market and into the illicit market. There's a couple of things going on in the state, and I won't get into it right now because I want to see how the state responds to it around licensing and cracking down on some of the illicit operators that are creating more competition. But, the DCC just got put together, as we talked about a few shows back. So I think we'll see where they net out with their efforts. But it stands to be an interesting fall here in California. But I would say this is just part of being an early market that's trying to get its legs underneath itself and trying to understand what the supply demand curve is going to look like. And Sai, to your point, in the conversations we've had, more of these retail doors getting open and more prime locations where people have more access to legal cannabis, because in California, local jurisdictions still had made that very difficult. So, I would say we'll watch this story, and I think it'll be interesting to see what the data tells us about if there's any pricing changes through to the end consumer. But it will be interesting.
Yeah, those stores certainly can't open fast enough that we talked about a few shows back around, the voters went and said, look, we want to have cannabis retail in our jurisdiction. It was banned in the beginning. I don't think a lot of those, licenses may have been issued. I don't think we've seen the stores open yet. And I think this is like a supply demand problem. And certainly there is demand in the legal market, but the problem is the access, right? The limited access, and it drives people to the black market. And we all know that there is a black market in California. I don't know the size of it, but I've got to imagine that it's quite significant yet, and we need to flip that around, and then maybe that balances out. But unfortunately, it's probably not going to happen before the end of the year when these things will really have an impact on these growers. So it is just growing pains, I guess, for the space. But we haven't seen anything yet on the retail side as far as significant pricing changes. But
Hmm.
maybe we'll watch that towards the tail end of the year.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on from California and Hall of Flowers here and cover maybe a bit of industry news and some stuff that came out this week here. The first, and we've talked about this, at length, all the different vehicles of federal change, whether it's Schumer's Cannabis Opportunity Acts, the MORE Act, and Safe Banking. And Safe Banking is the one that made some headlines today, or maybe it was yesterday, getting written into the National Defense Authorization something, NDAA Act, I think is maybe what it is. I'll tell you, if you're in the cannabis industry, you learn more about how the federal government works than like anything Schoolhouse Rock could have ever, taught you about this is a bill and how it gets through. Because it's actually much more complicated.
So complicated.
And so this is an interesting one, I would say, to kind of associate it there. And it sounds like, I mean, certainly this is a good thing, right? Any sort of progress, as we've said at length, right? There's progress, something's happening, but it could be DOA, right? The Senate could say, you know what, we have our own version of this, and we're going to put this through. And it doesn't include that and goes nowhere. Maybe Schumer says, hey, you know what? I've spent a lot of time and energy, and this is my baby over here, and I don't want to lose it to safe banking, even though they sounds like they're opening up a little bit to the idea of, baby steps in with safe banking. I know that Schumer asked for, comments. I think those have come in now. I think the comment period is maybe done on the Cannabis Opportunity Act that he's pulled together. So you might have some sunk costs here on this thing and want to see this through as best you can, even though we all know like it's going to be really challenging given the climate to get something like that through. Or the Senate could say, hey, you know what, this is great. Let's make this happen. Let's put it in, and we see something towards the tail end of the year, and it goes through. I don't know. What's your bet here?
Well, we're getting closer to the end of the year, and at the beginning of this year, I made my predictions for 2021. And one of the things I said was that I thought SAFE would get passed this year. And then I felt like I had to eat those words, especially with what happened with Schumer and Booker and the, what is it? It's the, whatever it's called, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. And I thought we missed our opportunity for 2021, but here it is. And it just shows that people are continuing to try to get this thing through in spite of ourselves. So I don't know. I'm hopeful it could happen, although I just saw a tweet seriously like an hour ago from Chuck Schumer again pushing
His
the CIOA, as opposed to talking about getting things done in this what is it, the NDAA? Anyway, all these things. But I don't know. If we got it done, like you said, the substance of it isn't tremendous. It wouldn't make a huge amount of difference to the industry, but it would be a significant symbolic shift forward. And we need these steps to be taken. And in fact, I saw Ben Kovler kind of retweet Schumer saying like, baby steps. We've got to keep taking steps forward or else we're just slipping behind. So, and pointing out to them too that the people who are being harmed by not having this level of banking, it's not the big businesses in cannabis. It's the smaller operators, it's the minority applicants. And so we've got to really think through these things. So we'll see. I'm
Yeah,
gonna be optimistic because then if I got that 2021 prediction right, I'll be pretty pumped.
yeah. Well, it very well could happen. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems like a small win, and it's still something that Schumer can point to. And it does seem like early on, Cory Booker seemed against it, but then it's come around to actually this does have some benefits to, the social equity component, which is a big piece of the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act that they're working on. So maybe. Anyways, just something. Yeah, it's some news. The fact that it even got into the NDAA is good, I think. So fingers crossed, but we'll keep watching it.
We shall.
In other news, New York finished building out their committee. Do you have the latest on this?
Yeah, so the governor, I will give her credit. She just stepped into that role. I mean, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, not even like 4 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And she's already fully filled out the regulatory board with the final two appointees. And it's interesting because they've got Ruben McDaniel of the Dormitory Authority and Jessica Garcia of the UFCW Labor Union who rounded this out. And so here we go. I mean, it felt like we were getting nowhere in New York for a long time. It was a lot of hurry up and wait, and now we've got a regulatory board. So to me, this indicates that we can start seeing baby steps of progress there, and I'll take it because a lot of us have our eyes on Q1 2023 for New York to open their adult use market. And I think a lot of us would also, in the interim, because I do have friends who are actual medical patients with MS and certain conditions in New York who do not have access to good product. And so I'd like to see them opening up the form factors and some of those things on the medical market in advance of the adult use program. So that could be, we haven't talked a lot about that, but that would be a nice interim step in New York State and would be, to me, a wise step too, just to start opening these things up instead of just going from a very limited market to all of a sudden opening the doors to adult use in about a year and
Right.
a quarter. So I'm happy about this. This is progress, and I'll take it. This is good.
Yeah, it does seem to be a lot faster than what was happening before. It felt like nothing was happening. A lot of talk
Nothing
and
was
nothing.
happening.
Yeah. So that is fantastic.
Yeah.
And yeah, you mentioned that comment about like seeing New York brands. I hadn't really thought about that. It's going to be, I'm really excited about New York. I was thinking about the size of the market, a lot of people, East Coast, but it will be really cool to see how this thing shapes up. So good to hear that things are coming together.
Yeah, I don't know. New York's pretty cool. There's cool things happening there from a creative standpoint. So I'm pretty pumped. See what goes
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, California better get its act together
Oh,
in
yeah.
the next 18 months.
It's going to be like Biggie and Tupac, but cannabis brand building. I don't know about that. Hopefully, it has a better ending for everybody.
But I like that tension that may happen. That's going to be pretty cool. That'll be cool
Yeah.
to watch.
Mm.
Awesome. And then the latest bit of news here was Amazon. So if we all remember, Amazon made some headlines, what was that, 6 months ago? Felt like some time ago where they were talking about getting
Yeah.
involved to try and enact change in the cannabis industry. And just this week in a blog post, they talked about, supporting the two pieces of legislation around decriminalization, the stuff that we always talk about. And so it's good to know that, they're out there, really advocating. I mean, they're looking at the MORE Act, they're looking at the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act. I don't think there's a mention of SAFE, but this is good. I mean, I think you made a comment before, like strange bedfellows, but it's like, whatever it's going to take to get us there, right, is a good thing. I got asked early on when this happened, we're in Seattle by a local Seattle publication, like a tech publication. And it's like, is Amazon, are they hoping to do this because they want to get into the business, of retail, and it's like, well, it's really an HR thing. It's really an employment issue, right? And you think
Yeah.
about the scale of their business, they touch on, every state, and every state has, these different rules and what's permitted and not permitted and what kind of medical conditions, can you have to have cannabis and so on. And I think it's really hard for them to navigate. And they need more and more people, in warehouses and other jobs. And this is certainly not completely altruistic for the industry, right? They want to get this changed for their bottom line and to make sure that they have people. But it is interesting to think about, maybe one day federal legalization is a long ways away before they get into the retail business. But we have seen brands in Canada, some of the larger retailer brands that are involved and invested in different ways in retailers in the legal market there. And you never know. But I don't think that's something that we're going to see in the next 10 years, but certainly the HR piece. So I don't know, just exciting news, that this came back out again, even though it kind of felt like the same announcement from last time, not that different.
Yeah, it didn't feel like anything fresh or new, but they're definitely staying in the cycle on it, which I found interesting. So, I mean, yeah, and it's interesting. I know, I mean, so many people are having trouble finding people to come work for them. I mean, even like the other day, it took me like an hour and a half to get my bag. And I went to complain
Wow.
because Alaska has a whole, at the airport is what
30
I'm talking about.
minutes or less
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
And I went in there, I was like, what's the deal? Did you guys lose all our bags? And they were like, no, we just have nobody to work for us right now. And I was like, we have a problem. I mean, we have a problem. I hear about this at restaurants. So I think in general, we have to rethink about how we make employment practices work for people and not punish them for being consumers of cannabis, because let's face it, it's part of our life now. And as we've talked about, it shouldn't be in a silo. So I think it's fine. And I'm happy to see them kind of recycling this, even if it wasn't a big update. It's just like, yep, they're still participating. So it is interesting timing how it hit right around the reintroduction of SAFE, or the insertion of SAFE into the NDAA. So I was kind of like,
Wow.
I don't know,
Do you have any idea how many people work at Amazon?
1 billion.
Yeah, it's like it's a million. I think it's a mil. Let's see. NBC News, Amazon now employs almost 1 million people in the U.S. One in every 169 workers.
And what
This
does that
was
go?
from July.
That's okay. And then like, what does that go to in, for example, November, December? I mean, it's got to go up at least 20% or something.
Oh, that's true with the seasonal workers
The
that come
seasonal
in.
workers. Yeah, because I never really thought about that too much until I saw that movie Nomadland, and then I
Right.
started kind of running down that rabbit hole. And there are like little pop-up, almost like communities that are built around those warehouses where they have the additional shifts and bring people on for those periods of time. It's really staggering the
Yeah.
impact they have on an employment situation. So
One in 169 that's a lot. I mean,
it's
if
a lot of
you're,
damn people.
yeah, you can be in a room with 169 people. Someone works at Amazon. That seems pretty crazy. So it makes sense why they're so involved at this point on change. But hopefully it helps.
Agree.
Well, I think that'll do it. I gotta admit, it's great to be back. Looking forward to getting back onto regular schedule programming, even with all the travel coming up. I'm sure for both of us, we'll do the best we can. For those listening, if you want to support us, be sure you rate us on your favorite podcasting app. That definitely helps. And keep listening. We'll
Take
see you
care.
next time.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.